Do you support President Trump's full and unconditional pardon of January 6 rioters who violently assaulted law enforcement officers?
It's not for me to question President Trump's exercise of the pardon power any more than it would be for me to question President Biden's commutation of death sentences.
And there's objective evidence to the contrary. On your call with individuals in the public integrity section, did you state, suggest, or imply that the section's career attorneys could be fired if none of them agreed to sign the brief dismissing Mayor Adams' indictment?
No.
Did you state, suggest, or imply that any individual who agreed to sign the brief would be rewarded?
Ranking Member Durbin, there's objective evidence in the record in that case that completely refutes the claim you just made.
Mr. Bove, did you order the removal of anyone who investigated or prosecuted rioters who assaulted law enforcement officers on January 6?
The attorneys that were terminated were on probationary status.
I have in my hand here the memorandum that you prepared on January 31st, 2025. Mr. Bove, you were deeply involved with the Justice Department's decision to drop federal corruption charges against New York City Mayor Eric Adams. You were personally involved in this. Multiple federal prosecutors resigned rather than to dismiss the indictment against Mayor Adams. These individuals made it clear that they believe you had engaged in a quid pro quo with Mayor Adams in order to secure his cooperation with President Trump's immigration priorities. Following these resignations, you reportedly held a video call with dozens of attorneys in the Justice Department's public integrity section. Do you remember that call?
I do.
Mr. Bove, why did you move forward with this case over the objection of the U.S. Attorney's Office, including the lead prosecutor?
I made a decision, and the department made a decision, to proceed with that motion because in the determination, it was a determination of the senior leadership of the department that policy reasons made it appropriate to dismiss the charges.
In order to get Mayor Adams to cooperate with President Trump's immigration policy, you were prepared to drop the charges against him?
That's completely false, and I just explained why.
Well, it is not completely false. That's exactly what happened. But the judge foiled your plans with prejudice dismissal of the case. You can no longer have the mayor on a leash, making sure that he follows the president's immigration policies.
Ranking Member Durbin, there's objective evidence in the record in that case that completely refutes the claim you just made.
And there's objective evidence to the contrary. On your call with individuals in the public integrity section, did you state, suggest, or imply that the section's career attorneys could be fired if none of them agreed to sign the brief dismissing Mayor Adams' indictment?
No.
Do you know the two individuals who signed the brief?
I do.
Edward Sullivan, one of them?
Yes.
Antoinette Bacon, another?
That's correct.
Did you state, suggest, or imply that any individual who agreed to sign the brief would be rewarded?
I'm sorry, I don't follow the question.
Well, you needed somebody to sign that brief, and those two stepped forward. Was there any suggestion they be treated any differently because of it?
No.
Which attorney, I've already asked this question. Have either of these attorneys been promoted since this occurrence?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Mr. Bove, in January 2022, you co-authored an article for Law 360 in which you described domestic terrorism as, quote, a national security issue. You then cited charges brought against attendees of the August 2017 Unite the Right white supremacist rally in Charlottesville and against members of the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers relating to the January 6th insurrection at the Capitol. You described these prosecutions in the article as, quote, recent examples that illustrate the asymmetry between international terrorism statutes and the patchwork of narrower laws that can be used to address domestic terrorism. Mr. Bove, do you stand by your characterization of the 2017 Unite the Right rally and January 6th as domestic terrorism?
I stand by what I said in the article.
You directed Ed Martin, the failed nominee to serve as U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, to fire dozens of line prosecutors who had worked on the January 6th case. You also sought the names of thousands of FBI employees who'd worked on investigations into January 6 rioters, accused these career public servants of, quote, weaponization, close quote, of the FBI. Mr. Bove, did you order the removal of anyone who investigated or prosecuted rioters who assaulted law enforcement officers on January 6?
So, Ranking Member Durbin, with respect to the prosecutors that you just referenced, there was a decision that was made in response to moves by the prior administration to embed temporary assistant United States attorneys who were brought to the district for purposes of the January 6 cases into that office as permanent employees, in many instances after the 2024 election. When I found out about that, I found it to be unacceptable from the perspective of the management of that office and the need for the permanent U.S. attorney put forth by the President and by Attorney General Bondi to manage the office and to staff it. The attorneys that were terminated were on probationary status. I was advised, I did not make this decision alone, that
Mr. Bove, this doesn't square with your own words. I have in my hand here the memorandum that you prepared on January 31st, 2025 to U.S. attorneys and others, in which you made it clear this was about more than provisional employees being dismissed. Let me read what you wrote. In an executive order issued on January 20th, 2025, President Trump appropriately characterized that work as having involved a grave national injustice that's been perpetrated upon the American people over the last 4 years. This is not about provisional employees. It's about January 6 prosecutions. You call them a domestic terrorism event in this article that you have written. Most people, those of us who lived through this ordeal, understand it was such a domestic terrorist event, and now you're trying to have it both ways. You're saying you dismiss the people who prosecuted those who beat up on our law enforcement officers, and it had nothing to do with January 6th. Your words defy that.
That's not correct, Ranking Member Durbin, most respectfully, because both things can be true. I did and continue to condemn unlawful behavior, particularly violence against law enforcement. At the same time, I condemn heavy-handed and unnecessary tactics by prosecutors and agents. Both of those things, I submit, are characteristic of these events that
These
we're talking
people
about.
paid for your strategy with their careers. They lost their jobs in the Department of Justice and in the FBI because you identified them as being involved in January 6th prosecution. You cannot call, on one hand, that prosecution as a grave injustice, as you did in your own memo here, and then on the other hand, tell me how seriously you feel about people assaulting police officers.
I have to disagree again, respectfully, most respectfully. No FBI agents, to my knowledge, were terminated in connection with the list that's referenced in that memo. What I requested was some information about who had participated so that I could begin, and the department could begin a process of reviewing the events to identify whether there were the types of heavy-handed tactics that I just referenced. That process.
I have one last question here. Do you support President Trump's full and unconditional pardon of January 6 rioters who violently assaulted law enforcement officers?
It's not for me to question President Trump's exercise of the pardon power any more than it would be for me to question President Biden's commutation of death sentences or his pardons of drug traffickers.
What you just witnessed in that is one of the most intense and consequential confrontations we've seen in a confirmation hearing in years. This isn't just a senator asking tough questions. This is Senator Dick Durbin walking straight into the center of a political firestorm and demanding accountability from someone who could soon hold enormous power inside the Justice Department. And the stakes couldn't be higher. The hearing explodes the moment Durbin presses Emil Bove about one of the most controversial decisions of the Trump-era DOJ, the abrupt dismissal of federal corruption charges against New York City Mayor Eric Adams. And right away, you can feel the tension. Durbin doesn't warm up or circle around the issue. He goes straight to the heart of the allegation that dropping the case wasn't rooted in the evidence or injustice, but in political maneuvering, that it was part of a quid pro quo to secure Mayor Adams' cooperation with immigration policies pushed by President Trump. And that accusation is not small. If even partially true, it calls into question whether the Justice Department was being used as a bargaining tool, a political weapon, rather than an independent institution. Durbin reinforces this by reminding everyone that multiple prosecutors didn't just disagree with the dismissal. They resigned. They walked away from their own case rather than put their names on a decision they believed was compromised. That kind of mass resignation from seasoned prosecutors is almost unheard of, and that alone tells you something was deeply wrong. As Durbin presses Bove, you can see Bove trying to present himself as calm, measured, and procedural, saying these decisions were made by senior leadership, implying they were driven by policy and not political pressure. But Durbin isn't buying it. He lays out the timeline, the prosecutor's departures, the video call Bove reportedly held with the public integrity section, and the suggestion that career attorneys felt pressured, even intimidated, into doing something they fundamentally believed was wrong. And then comes the moment where Durbin exposes the contradiction. He reads directly from Bove's own memo, the memo where Bove labeled the January 6 prosecutions a grave national injustice. Suddenly, Bove's attempt to distance himself from political motivations doesn't hold up. His own words betray the framing he's trying to maintain. Durbin highlights that you cannot call the prosecution of violent rioters who attacked law enforcement an injustice, while also insisting that you care deeply about law enforcement, accountability, and the rule of law. It's an impossible position, and Durbin forces him to confront it in real time. This is where the exchange turns brutal. Durbin lays out the reality. People lost their careers because Bove and others in the Trump DOJ targeted those who handled the January 6 cases, prosecutors, FBI agents, people who were doing their jobs, people who faced threats and trauma during one of the darkest days in modern American history. And Bove's memos, decisions, and actions sent them a clear message. Their work was to be undone, their investigations discredited, and their service punished. Durbin's frustration is palpable because what he's outlining isn't just a personnel dispute. It's about whether a future DOJ official tried to reshape the Justice Department into an extension of political power, punishing those who pursued cases that Donald Trump disliked and rewarding those who helped implement his political agenda. By the time Durbin reaches his closing question, whether Bove supports President Trump's full and unconditional pardons of January 6 rioters, the tension has peaked. Bove hides behind the familiar shield nominees use, refusing to criticize presidential pardon authority. But by this point, the implications are already clear. Durbin has exposed a nominee whose past decisions, writings, and actions raise serious questions about his independence, his judgment, and his willingness to separate justice from politics. For viewers, the takeaway is enormous. This hearing isn't just about one nominee. It's about the future of the Justice Department, whether it remains an institution anchored in law or becomes one guided by political loyalty. And Durbin's interrogation forces those questions into the open where they can't be ignored. If you want more breakdowns like this, more clarity, and more context around the moments shaping national politics, subscribe and stay locked in. Because these hearings aren't just political theater, they reveal the people who might soon be making decisions that affect all of us.